So that should look a little bit familiar to you. Okay, there's only one cell that is going to be responsible for bone resorption, and that's the osteoclast. That's the one that will release its digestive proteins, the enzymes, that will degrade, okay, the matrix. Mainly, it'll just kind of grind down the collagen fibers. And when that happens, then it releases the hydroxyapatite, which is the bone salts, and then it has hydrochloric acid, which kind of undergoes or causes that transformation of that hydroxyapatite, and it frees up all the individual components there. So we'll have individual calcium, individual phosphate molecules released. Phosphate we can use for a plethora of things, but the nice thing about phosphate is that it's an important ingredient for ATP. So we'll use it for energy production. All right, and then calcium we need for many things. We'll learn in chapter 10 and in 12, we need it for neurological transmission, for potential transmission, muscle contraction. We'll also need it for blood clotting. And of course, it's one of the ingredients for our bones. So when our blood calcium levels drop, called hypocalcemia, osteoblasts build, that's right, and osteoclasts destroy, correct. Think B build, blast, okay, and then the clast. I used to think like catastrophic, bad things happen. That's the osteoclast. They break the bone down. So we'll see bone resorption when our blood calcium levels are low. All right, we'll see some hormones that are going to help with that. All right, so let's move on to some new material here. We have seen the osteons before. All right, when we were doing the lab, we were talking about compact bone and we were discussing the tissue types. And so the functional structure of compact bone is called the osteon. And think of it like a tree. So it's going to be cylindrical like a tree. All right, it's going to have rings around it. So we mentioned that it is the basic functional. What does that mean? Functional means that's the physiology aspect of this tissue. And then basic structural unit, that's going to be the anatomy. Okay? So this osteon plays a big role in both the anatomy of bone and the physiology of bone. Because bone is our organ when we're talking about the skeleton. All right? Okay, so keep in mind when we talk about these osteons, how they're oriented in space. I was going to say time and space, but that's too sci-fi. All right, but in space of the bone. So remember what the diaphysis is. What is the diaphysis? You all remember when we were talking about the long bone? Yeah, it's the shaft. Yeah, it's the long part. Okay, so if the shaft goes up and down like this, all right, so will the osteons. Okay, now the book describes it as a bullseye target. I think of it as a tree. Regardless, it's going to have that central canal at the center of it, that big black spot, and then you'll have rings around it. Okay, all right, and in those rings, throughout the compact bone, we'll have our lacuna, which are those spaces or chambers that houses the osteocytes. Okay. And then at the center and the central canal, that's where we're going to find our blood vessels and our nerves. All right? So keep in mind, all right, I've seen it asked before on a test. What is located in the central canal? Blood vessels and nerves, specifically the sensory nerves. Okay, so and that's why we call it the central canal, because it is centrally located in our functional unit of the osteon. And it runs up and down. So the rings that run around it, all right, specifically the rings around each individual osteon are called concentric lamellae. Okay? Think of lamellae like layers. All right? And they're made up of collagen fibers. This is cool. If you're into engineering or whatnot, probably not. Why? Because if you were, you wouldn't be in this class. You'd probably be in engineering school. All right? But the fact that these collagen fibers that are located in the concentric lamellae are at 90 degrees to the previous layer, okay? So I'll show you what that means. I'm going to come right back to this. So if you look here on this slide, looks like a wedding cake to me. All right, so here's our osteon here. Okay, you can see in the center of it we have our blood vessels and our nerve here. And so what we're going to do is now we're just going to pick each of these individual lamellae and we're going to raise them up. And that's what we did here. Okay, and what this picture is showing you, here are the collagen fibers. So the collagen fibers on this ring immediately around the central canal are going at 45 degrees in this direction here, okay? While then the layer outside of that, which would be this secondary layer here, are going at 45 degrees the other way. But when we compare them to one another, you know anything about math, it makes a 90-degree angle, which is cool. And what that does is that adds strength to bone, okay, because it's at that angle. All right, so by themselves, they're at 45 degrees. But when we compare them to the previous layer or the adjoining layer or lamellae, all right, it'll be at 90 degrees. And that helps strengthen that tissue there. All right, back to this one. All right. Well, at the same time as it gives that structural integrity to the tissue, it also gives it a little bit of pliability or resilience. So it adds a little bit of flexibility. Because remember, collagen fibers are part of the organic matrix. The organic matrix is what allows our bones to resist what we call tensile strength. It's what gives bone a little bit, just a slight bit of flexibility. Bones can bend just a little bit. Right? And it's because of these collagen fibers that allow that to happen. Okay, so when you see collagen fibers, think organic matrix, right? Because remember, when we're talking about, like the slide says here, bone connective tissue is made up of cells and extracellular material. That extracellular material, the EM, is broken down into two parts. I said it last class. GS, which is ground substance, and protein fibers. I'll just write it as PI. And that's where our collagen is found. Okay? Okay, good so far? Not too bad? All right. So, the mature bone cell that lives in these osteons are the osteocytes. Now remember, these were the guys, the osteoblasts at one point, that were building the bone matrix. And then they started to slow down, and eventually they stopped producing the organic matrix there. And when that happens, you know, the organic matrix undergoes calcification and hardening, and it pretty much sealed itself up into these little holes here, or spaces called the lacuna. All right? And at that point, then the osteoblasts convert into the mature bone cells of osteocytes. And those osteocytes have one job: maintain the matrix. Make sure it's okay. Make sure it's not cracking, all right? That there's enough material in there. If there's not, they convert back into osteoblasts, build more matrix, it hardens, and then they go back to their osteocyte lifestyle, okay? So that's their job: maintain the bone matrix. If anything changes, all right, make changes accordingly. All right, so if it starts to weaken or is damaged, then we need to repair it, okay? If you somehow gain 100 pounds, all right, because of whatever, all right, you're lifting weights and you start to take steroids or whatever, then your skeleton needs to accommodate for that, so these cells will build that bone matrix up. So here's a lacuna, here's another lacuna, and then there's an osteocyte here, osteocyte here. And they want to talk to each other, so they can, because they have these little black lines that go from lacuna to lacuna. We call those cannuliculi. Okay, they're these small channels. And so they go from one lacuna to the other, and they allow these osteocytes to communicate to one another. Okay? What we call the intracellular contact. And so it's cool, because one, they can exchange nutrients with one another, minerals like calcium, phosphate, all right? gases like oxygen, because that's part of hydroxyapatite, hydrogen, all right? So basically, these cannuliculi allow these lacuna, all right, or the osteocytes in the lacuna to exchange things so they can actually sustain themselves and maybe help somebody else, like your neighbor coming over and borrowing a cup of sugar, all right? So these osteocytes can take from one another, all right, and help with nutrient supply. And at the same time, they can even exchange wastes, because some osteocytes and some lacuna are closer to the blood vessels than the others. So the ones that are really far away can transfer their trash, right? It's like you don't want to take the trash out to the curb, so you have, well, not all of you are old enough, but if you have kids, you make your kids do it, all right? I don't want to go out there. It's too far away, okay? So you just hand it off to them, then they take it, okay? All right, so here if we look close, we can see on a nice electron microscope, some of these are really nice. This looks familiar to you, I'm sure. All right, so here you can see that central canal, and then all these little black dots represent the lacuna. And inside, all right, you'll have your osteocytes in there. But if you look, these kind of black lines that are coming from one lacuna to the other, all right, they're dragging across. Those are your cannuliculi. So this guy way out here can give his trash to this guy can give his trash to this guy, and this guy can send it into the vein. All right, boom, ship it out, we're done. How do I zoom in? Yeah, I don't understand why it doesn't zoom in for you guys at home. I was watching one of the videos before. Then I'm not sure. I don't know if you have this on your screen at home. Okay. So there's a couple other structures, all right, but now we're going to move outside of our osteon. Okay? So these are not a part of the osteon. All right? So we have what we call Volkmann canals or perforating canals. Remember what I said about the central canals. Here's the shaft of the bone, excuse me. Here's the diaphysis of the bone. All right? And the osteons run parallel to it. If their osteons run parallel to it, the central canals run parallel to it. All right? Well, the perforating canals go perpendicular, so they communicate sideways. Okay? So the central canals go up and down. The perpendicular canals go side to side, or the Volkmann canals. So you're making this huge network of spaces throughout. All right? And so again, this now allows the central canals of neighboring or adjacent osteons to communicate with each other or connect to one another. So when you look here at this picture, you can see here are the central canals, here and here and here. All right, so you can see how the central canals are going parallel, and then our perforating or Volkmann canals go perpendicular, so they go side to side. So you can see there's a lot of sharing, all right, of blood vessels, nerves, and whatnot. Kind of neat. Okay, so the other type of lamellae, we talked about, all right, the concentric lamellae, and those are the ones that go around the central canal. Now we have what's known as the circumferential lamellae. What's the circumference of a circle? The outside of it, right? Exactly, okay? So here, if I draw this circle here, all right, the outside of it is that blue line that I just drew. That is the circumference of the circle. So the circumferential lamellae are going to be, when we talk about the external ones, are going to be, it's a lamellae or a layer that runs around the outside of the bone. Okay? So it'll be just underneath or internal to the periosteum. And then we have the internal circumferential lamellae, and that's going to be obviously on the inside, because remember, our long bones are hollow. So we have that internal circumferential lamellae, and that's going to be just inside or internal to our endosteum. Remember, the endosteum is on the inside here, periosteum is on the outside here. Okay? But both of these lamellae will run the entire circumference of the bone, wraps right around it. Come right back and show you. Right here. So here you can see This is the external circumferential lamellae. See, it's a big, big ring that goes around the entire length. And on the inside here, it's tough to see, but right there, that's the internal circumferential lamellae. And there's one more type of lamellae you need to know, and that's the interstitial lamellae. Now this right here, all right, is when you see it's an incomplete lamellae. And it could be because as the bone was growing, all right, remember we're absorbing and, we're making bone and then we're resorbing bone, all right, we're breaking bone down, okay? So sometimes we don't finish the project. So this type of lamellae we'll find in between the osteons, all right, or it was in the middle of an osteon being partially resorbed. So that's what we see here in this picture here. Okay, you can see there's parts of lamellae here in between these three osteons here. Okay, and that's that partially absorbed lamellae here and here. Okay, because remember our bones are constantly remodeling themselves. So they'll build, the osteons will build bone matrix, and then the osteoclasts, which are part of that, all right, tissue, will then resorb, all right, to make room for if you're growing or if you've damaged the bone. Okay? All right, that's for compact bone. So really kind of keep in mind, this is what we're looking at here. This is all compact bone that we just saw here. All right, this layer here. All right. So spongy bone or trabecular bone is a little bit different. That's going to be this bone here on the inside. All right. One, all right, we're going to see, all right, a nice, how do I want to say it, lattice work. If you know what lattice work is, I think of scaffolding, all right, when I talk about spongy bone. Okay. But it's this type of bone here, all right, where you have just these like long kind of processes, all right, or parts of the bone that just kind of move. Yeah, baking lattice, yeah, exactly. But we're going to see this just internal to the compact bone. But this is where we're going to find our bone marrow. Okay? And this spongy bone helps to resist stresses, all right, that compact bone, yeah, compact bone does too. I mean, it's wonderful. That's the main resilient part of the bone is the compact bone. But spongy bone, trabecular bone, will also contribute to that. Okay? So in this situation, when we talk about spongy bone, we got a new term, parallel lamellae. All right? So again, in this type of lamella, and I'll show you a picture of it, similar type of situation. We've got our mature bone cells, the osteocytes, where they live in the lacuna, and then from each lacuna, it'll radiate canuliculi. All right, so it's the same type of relationship, but we don't see. Now look at this picture and tell me what you don't see here. I mean, there's a lot of things that you don't see, but what is the one thing that kind of stands out? Look at this picture here. Okay, see this right here, this bone matrix and all that, and then go here. Well, nerves, no, osteons. There's no osteons. You don't have a central canal, right? We don't see that here, okay? So we're missing that. That's what we're going to be missing here in spongy bone. Compact bone, yes. Spongy bone, no. Okay? But you can see here, to get a little bit of an appreciation here on the trabeculae, you can see, all right, this layer here, all right, of osteoblasts. That's the endosteum. Okay? So you can see it's going to line all of these trabeculae here. All right? So you'll have your osteoblasts, osteoclasts, because we're going to be making bone, remodeling bone. And then inside here, we have our osteocytes. Okay. So we're going to move into a topic here now in a moment in which we're going to discuss how, all right, we grow our bone. All right, like how your femur, your big leg bone in your thigh, gets longer. All right. So in order to do that, we have to talk about cartilage for a few moments. All right, so I'm going to go over some of the aspects of cartilage. Cartilage is similar, all right, to bone because they're both connective tissues. So remember, we're dealing with connective tissue. So we're going to have a predominant cell type, okay? Then we're also going to have an extracellular matrix and protein fibers that are going to make up our connective tissue. So I'm going to review some of that with you, okay? So just a couple things here to talk to you about cartilage. So we're going to start off with hyaline cartilage because that's going to be the one, all right, that we're going to deal with a lot, especially when we talk about how the fetal skeleton converts from a hyaline cartilage skeleton framework into actual bone, okay? So again, this right here says it all about connective tissue. You have cells that are scattered through a matrix of protein fibers, all right? And you'll have some ground substance in there, okay? That's connective tissue. Okay, so in this case, our ground substance, all right, when we're dealing with cartilage, all right, is going to be a gel-like type of substance. All right, so we're going to be dealing with these guys, proteins, all right, proteoglycans. So not so much calcium. I want you to think, not permanently, but for right now, just think if we add calcium to anything when we're talking about the skeletal system, it's going to make it hard. All right. So let's not add calcium to cartilage because then it'll make it like bone, and we don't want that right now. Okay. So because probably for the rest of this class, whenever I mention adding calcium to something, we're talking about bone only. Okay, it's going to make it hard and like bone. All right, just for right now, okay? So, but in cartilage, we're not going to have calcium. We don't want calcium, okay? So our ground substance was going to be made up of proteoglycans and lots of water, okay? Lots and lots of water. So that makes, all right, our connective tissue flexible, yay, we like that, bendy, okay? And also resilient, close to bone, but not quite. Okay, because it's a different makeup. So bone's resilient, all right, and so is cartilage, but cartilage isn't as strong as bone, but it's more flexible, all right? So we can compress it like we see in fibrocartilage, all right, and it's an awesome shock absorber. Think about it. The menisci, those discs in your knees, hoorah. Your vertebral discs, those are great shock absorbers. They handle it very, very nicely. And the articular cartilage even the cartilage that coats the ends of your long bones, it functions as a shock absorber. All right? But is hyaline primarily present in growth? Wait a minute. I didn't get a chance to read all that. Is hyaline primarily present in growth if not containing calcium? Yeah. So when we're talking about the growth plate, yes. Okay? But somehow, we'll discuss this, when we start to add calcium into that cartilage matrix, it's going to start to harden things. And that's going to be part of the process to convert that cartilage into bone. So that's why I want you to think, if I add calcium to this mixture here, whatever we're dealing with, it's going to harden it. Okay? And you'll see why, not in a moment, but later on. Okay? So when we're dealing with mature cartilage, and I say mature cartilage is avascular. We all know what that means. No blood vessels, okay? And guess what? No nerves. So if you herniate your disc in your back, that is cartilage there, all right? But that can be painful only because it's not because the cartilage was damaged, but the nerves nearby that cartilage are compromised. So mature cartilage is avascular and has no nerve supply, okay? All right. So let's talk about the players. Let's talk about the machinery involved, okay? So we're going to be dealing with two types of cells here. Chondroblasts, again, B to build. So the chondroblasts are going to build or make that cartilage matrix that we just discussed, okay? Guess what's going to happen? These chondroblasts produce the matrix. They get stuck in the matrix, all right? And that little hole that they find to live in, or those chambers or spaces, those are called lacunae, similar as to what we saw in bone. And what will happen? then the cell will convert into a chondrocyte, which is a mature cartilage cell. And guess what its job is to do? Maintain the matrix. Okay? Just like the osteocyte. Osteocyte is going to maintain its matrix. Chondrocytes are going to maintain theirs. All right? And same type of thing. If something happens to that cartilage, all right, if it needs to grow more matrix, the chondrocyte will do that. Okay? So, just like we saw with bone, on the outside of bone, we saw periosteum. On the outside of cartilage, we have perichondrium, except for fibrocartilage. Remember, there's 3 types of cartilage. Hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, which is the shock-absorbing cartilage, and elastic cartilage. So the fibrocartilage is the only one that does not have perichondrium. 86, the perichondrium. Does anyone know what 86? Has anyone here worked in a restaurant before? Yeah, surrounding. Yep. 86 means discontinued. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So there is no perichondrium on fibrocartilage. Okay. So what is it made up of? Dense irregular connective tissue. That's hardcore. So guess what? It helps to maintain the shape of that cartilage. Because remember, dense irregular connective tissue has a ton of collagen. Collagen will add strength to whatever type of tissue it's in. Okay? Okay. Dense irregular connective tissue. Okay, so you guys ready to learn how cartilage grows? All right, we're going to talk about that now. Because first we're going to talk about how cartilage grows, and then we're going to talk about how bone grows. But first, we got to start with cartilage. Okay? All right. So when we're talking about cartilaginous growth, we're going to deal with you, me, when we're an embryo. Okay? We start to develop this tissue. So there's 2 types of growth that occur. All right? Interstitial, all right? I remember interstitial INT means the growth occurs inside of the cartilage, internally. Okay? So because of that, the cartilage lengthens. So interstitial growth is the lengthening of the cartilage through internal growth of that cartilage. Okay? The other type of growth is known as appositional, and that's on the outside. All right? And that has to do with width, like a tree. Okay? A tree grows apposition. It grows both ways, actually, because it goes taller. So think of it like a tree. Okay? As the tree grows taller, right, that's the interstitial growth. As it gets thicker and wider, right, that's the appositional growth. Okay, but that occurs on the outside. I took a biology 101 class, or I think it was 102 in college. I'm not proud of this because I love biology, but I got a D in the class. It was plant biology, that's why, all right? And on the plant, all right, just underneath the bark, if you peel the bark away on the tree, that's where you have that living layer of tissue for the tree, right here. And that's what makes your tree thicker, because that living layer keeps growing rings, like our Osteons do, okay? All right, so that, just memorize it, but think of it like a tree growing, all right? Interstitial growth is the lengthwise, how it gets taller, okay? And that is because the inside of the cartilage is growing. And then appositional is on the outside, and that is an increase in girth or width. All right, it's story time. I love telling stories using these slides. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. All right, this is figure 7.9a. Okay. So what we're doing is, here's a sample of our cartilage. Okay, this is hyaline cartilage. So hyaline cartilage has perichondrium. Okay? So this right outside here is the perichondrium. Right here, that dark blue. Okay? So obviously these pink things right here, or purplish things, those are our chondroblasts or chondrocytes. Okay? So these little pink things, those are cells. All right? So we're going to start off all right, talking about interstitial growth, how cartilage gets taller, or lengthwise growth. So that means we got to go inside. We're going to go inside here into the internal portion. We're going to look at this little section here. So here we have our chondrocyte, and it's sitting, see that little space there, it's sitting in the lacuna. Okay? So this chondrocyte is now going to divide. All right? Think of that chondrocyte like you in a twin bed. All right? And your 200-pound St. Bernard wants to get in the bed with you. Okay? Not enough room. All right? It's just not going to happen. So when this cell divides, okay, now it divides. Now these two cells, since they've mitotically divided, are chondroblasts. But they're sharing the same lacuna. If you've ever been to New York, studio apartments are the least expensive type of apartment to live there, but they're tiny as all get out. It's about as big as a closet, right? So that's like literally having one apartment in a closet and yet two people want to share it. Not going to happen. So you have these two cells in the same lacuna. So they want to get away from each other. So what do? They start to produce the cartilage matrix. They both do. All right? And it gets emitted all around them. So you can start to see now how that cartilage matrix is being produced and it's secreted just outwardly. As it does that, it pushes the two cells away from each other. Okay? And it keeps pushing away and keeps producing that cartilage matrix until they've separated themselves from each other and they have their own lacuna. All right? So now we used to just have the one cell here. Okay? Now we have two cells. They pushed each other away and they produced all this new matrix around them. And by doing that, all right, that pushes the cartilage upwards and downwards. And it causes the cartilage to grow in length like a tree growing up. Okay? It just pushes all around, makes that matrix there, all right, and it pushes the old matrix upwards and downwards, giving it that length. Okay? That's the interstitial growth of cartilage. All right, now let's talk about appositional growth. This is the width. This is how, like a tree gets thicker, all right, here is how our cartilage is going to get thicker. All right, so where does this occur? Width is going to be externally. So this is going to occur in the perichondrium here. Okay, so you can see here on our first slide here, all right, we have up here is that the mesenchymal cells. We know what the mesenchymal cells are. Those are like the stem cells, right? And they reside in the perichondrium. All right, so they will start to divide and produce, all right, our new cartilage cells, these guys right here, okay, and these guys. So they'll start to divide, the mesenchymal cell will divide, and it'll produce a new chondroblast. And that chondroblast, all right, will then start to produce its own matrix here, okay? Same type of scenarios we saw before. It secretes it all around itself. And by doing so, it pushes, all right, the perichondrium outwards. It expands, okay? Like if you blow up a balloon, you know how the balloon will expand out, right? Because these cells are in close proximity to the perichondrium, all right? It's generating this new matrix here, and it pushes out from the old matrix. Because remember, the perichondrium surrounds the whole cartilage. All right? So imagine this whole blue line. All right, there's cells in that blue line, and they keep dividing and dividing and dividing, and they push out. So the newer matrix will be on the outside, just like a tree, and the older matrix will be on the inside. So all this is new matrix. All right, and then it pushes the perichondrium out, because this line right here is the perichondrium. The same thing will happen. All right, the perichondrium will keep producing more chondroblasts. It'll push out the perichondrium, and it pushes out that new matrix. I'm going off the screen here. There we go. Okay, so it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what we're seeing here. All right, whoops. Why am I doing that? Okay, so that's what we're seeing. The old matrix gets pushed internally as the new matrix gets pushed externally, outwards. Okay, and then you're going to see the cells divide, they start to produce their own matrix, and then eventually they push away from each other, they convert back into a chondrocyte, all right, and then the same thing will happen, all right, more cells will start to get pushed down. Okay, so that is appositional growth. Oh, that's why. Oh, wait, hold on. There we go. Okay. So now we know how cartilage grows. So we're going to talk about one last part here, and then we're going to get into the fun stuff, all right? We're going to talk about the process of ossification, or it's also called osteogenesis. So what is that? That's the creation of new bone tissue, all right? So this is going to occur, all right, when we're an embryo. And you need to know this has been asked on several tests. This is going to occur weeks 8 through 12. We will start to grow bone tissue, all right, weeks 8 through 12, which is interesting, okay, because you're starting to grow bone tissue in your first trimester of development, which is pretty early. And this process goes on, all right, throughout your childhood up until adolescence. And adolescence can be late teens, early 20s. All right, and even I had growth spurt late into my, well, I say my mid-20s, but that was late for me. Okay, so basically ossification is making skeletons. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make bone. So you started off with a hyaline skeleton, a hyaline cartilage skeleton. So your skeleton was made up of hyaline cartilage. And now we're going to transform that skeleton into bone. And that process is called ossification. Okay? This starts in the 8th week of development through the 12th week. And it continues for a long period of time. And there's a possibility that some of you are still undergoing this process. It varies. So there's 2 types of ossification. Okay? You have what we call intramembranous, and then we also have endochondral. Well, chondral is cartilage. Okay? So we're definitely going to be dealing with cartilage here. Well, we're going to be dealing with cartilage from both. Okay? Okay, so there's intramembranous and endochondral.
So, as far as an example to try and visualize, if you're a runner, how does some of this material factor into the cartilage, the bone, the flexibility, and all that?
Well, are you talking about like bone remodeling or?
Or any of that? Is any of that related?
Yeah, and it's a perfect question because we're going to discuss that so endo means outside. Correct. So yes, we're going to talk about what influences that, and mechanical stress is one of those things, like running, foot pounding. You'll see that. So and a lot of times too, you know, any type of weight-bearing activity will actually influence bone growth. You don't even think about it. If you're a person that stands on their feet for all day long, your bone remodels to withstand those stresses, especially in the tibia, the medial portion or the inside of the femur bone. All right. If you're a person that sits all day long, you're not going to have that same bone dispersal on your tibia or femur. All right, if you sit all day long, because your stresses are placed in other places. Not as much though, because you're sitting down. But usually folks that will have a standing job, or even a job like if you have to carry stuff all day long, your skeleton will respond to that and have a much more dense, compact nature to it. Now, whether or not, when it comes to cartilage, not so much with that, with the formation of the cartilage, because the thing that you have to worry about when you're dealing with weight-bearing loads or any type of movement, when we're talking about this hyaline cartilage or even fibrocartilage, is the degeneration factor, the wear and tear. So it's pretty much going to be the same for everybody here. And there are some genetic variants that play a role into that. But for the most part, we'll all have like the same amount. I mean, unless my bone is actually bigger than yours and the surface of articulation where the bones are connecting is going to be bigger. I might have a little bit more hyaline cartilage because my bone is bigger, but it'll all pretty much be the same. That really won't change. Yeah. All right, so here's the first one, intramembranous ossification. So if you see here in our word intramembranous, you see membrane. So that's what we're going to see here. Okay, we're going to start off with the bone tissue developing inside this membrane. So this is going to occur, all right, in the cranial bones, those flat bones there. Some of our facial bones, which are flat in nature also. The mandible, and I say this every semester, the middle part or the central part of your collarbone. Your collarbone is the only bone, all right, that I know of that undergoes both intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification. And if you look at it, it is an irregular shaped bone. You know, at first glance, it looks like a long bone, but it's not. Okay. All right, so let's start. Intramembranous, there's not as many steps. It's a little bit easier to start off with it. So let's go through that, and we'll talk about intramembranous ossification. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one step at a time. So you'll see me do one step, and then I am going to advance to the picture. Okay, so we are going to start off in our example, all right, with a big glob of mesenchyme. Okay, you know what mesenchyme is? It's the embryonic stem tissue that connective tissue comes from. Okay, so in this case, our bone tissue will come from here. So that's what we see here. Here is our mesenchyme. Okay, all over the place. All right, so what will happen now, all right, certain spots within this mesenchyme, the mesenchymal cells will differentiate into osteoblasts. What do osteoblasts do? What's their one job? If you said synthesize and secrete osteoid, then yes, it's hard to understand with the mass. But you know, osteoid is the organic part of our matrix. So it starts to secrete, it starts to make and secrete, all right, the osteoid, which is primarily collagen, okay? So that's what we see in our first step here, okay? So those mesenchymal cells, all right, are going to differentiate into osteoblasts. Some will turn into the osteoprogenitor cells, which will then turn into osteoblasts. Okay, but eventually we're going to wind up with our osteoblasts, and they do one job: secrete the osteoid. Okay, remember the osteoid is a goo-like substance, primarily made up of collagen. Okay, collagen. That's the protein fiber, which is one component of the extracellular matrix. It's also going to produce the ground substance, which are going to be the glycoproteins and the proteoglycans. All right, they're just large molecules that we throw in there. Okay, first step, good so far, right? Glob mesenchyme, some of those cells will differentiate and turn into osteoprogenitor cells, and some will turn into osteoblasts, and then some of those osteoprogenitor cells will turn into osteoblasts. Okay, so that's what we see first. Now, what's that mean? What's calcification mean? Hardening, that's right. All right, calcification means to harden something. Remember what I told you before about calcium, okay? If we add calcium to whatever we're working with, it's going to make it hard. That's what's going to happen here, okay? So that osteoid that these osteoblasts have worked so hard in making, okay, all right, it's going to start to harden because these calcium bone salts come in, all right, and they cause the osteoid to crystallize and harden. Unfortunately, we've trapped our osteoblasts in that matrix, and they convert into osteocytes. Okay? Come right back to this slide. That's what we see here. Okay? So our osteoblasts have made that matrix. Calcium finds its way there, all right, causes the matrix to harden, and those cells get trapped, and they convert into osteocytes. Okay? Now this is happening all over the place in those flat bones, in your mandible, in the middle part of your clavicle. All right? So this is going on just randomly. Okay? So we're starting to see, all right, the formation of our bone tissue here. Okay? Good so far? Not too bad, not too bad. Trust me, this one is a little bit easier than the endochondral ossification. There's more steps to it. But I will tell you this, it follows a similar pattern. Osteoblasts make the matrix, calcium gets in there, hardens the matrix, and then some other stuff happens. We'll get to that. Okay. So there's only 3 steps or 4 steps to this. All right. The third step here, okay? So that first bone tissue that we make, that bone material, we give it a name. It's called woven bone. It's I don't want to say premature. It's immature. It's not a very good bone. All right? Mainly because it's poorly organized. Okay? Mature bone is better. That's called lamellar bone. That's much more organized. Okay? Like when you break your leg or your arm, the bone that gets deposited first just to fix the fracture is woven bone. And then your body remodels it into lamellar bone. So that's kind of what will happen here. Okay, so this woven bone gets deposited. All right, at the same time, all right, we start to form our periosteum. It's going to grow on the outside of this bone tissue here. Okay? So we'll see that mesenchyme tissue convert into the periosteum on the outside. All right, so I'm going to come right back. That's what we're seeing here in this picture. All right, so now this occurs on a grand scale, so we're seeing a lot more bone tissue occurring here. And so on the outside of that bone tissue, all right, we start to see the periosteum grow, not maturing, but forming. Okay, these mesenchyme cells now will start to lay down osteoprogenitor cells, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. Okay? Meanwhile, on the inside, all right, now, all right, we've formed, all right, this woven bone has these nooks and crannies occurring because the bone is starting to remodel that area, all right, and some of that tissue is going away. So blood vessels start to infiltrate into these areas here. Well, that's good, right? What's blood got? What's blood got that we like? It's got nutrients. It's got all sorts of stuff. Glucose, fatty acids, hormones, ions, all the nutrients, all the good stuff, respiratory gases. And has anyone here ever had a blood draw done on them? You ever read your lab test? I do all the time. If you look through there, the electrolytes, calcium, magnesium, sodium, phosphate, all that stuff. What's it bringing in? More calcium. What's calcium going to do? Make things hard. Okay? So now we have this direct transit system here supplying these cells, all right, and some of that tissue, more of this mesenchyme here, to undergo that ossification. And we're going to start to harden things on a grander scale. All right? Last part. Step 4. All right? So as we start to get these spaces in there, all right, the cells that are still active are now going to convert that primary or woven bone, which is poorly organized, into our lamellar bone. And this is way more organized, has a little bit more structure to it. Remember, this is where we're going to start to see our peanut butter sandwich. All right, the white butter is going to be on the outside. That's going to be the compact bone. And then the peanut butter is going to be the spongy bone in the middle. That's what we see. We'll see our 2 layers of compact bone. In between is going to be our spongy bone. Our spongy bone has those little spicules or the trabeculae there. And now we'll have, for example, all right, in our cranial bones, that nice flattened portion. But we'll still have the periosteum on the outside of the compact bone, which means we have a layer of periosteum on the outside of our skull, and we have a layer of periosteum on the inside. Okay? The periosteum is always going to be on the compact bone there. Okay, so that's what we'll see here in this picture. I won't even zoom in on this one. See how we got the compact bone here, and we've got the periosteum up here on it, and then we've got the compact bone down here with the periosteum down here. And don't forget, we've got the intercellular layer with all those cells. Okay? Osteoprogenitor cell, osteoblast, osteoclast. And then outside of that is our fibrous layer. That's the irregular, did I say irregular? Sorry. That's going to be our connective tissue, our dense irregular connective tissue. Okay. Questions so far? Not terrible, right? It's a step process. You just kind of go through it. But keep in mind, when we get to this next process here, right, we're going to start off. Now, in this situation, we're going to deal with a different type of tissue. We're going to deal with cartilage. So we're going to start our model with cartilage now. And you know what's living in the cartilage, right? What's the predominant cell in cartilage? It traps itself in the cartilage. Chondrocyte. Chondrocyte. Okay? So we're going to start off with that model. We do this next type of tissue. So we're going to start off with cartilage. We have chondrocytes living in the cartilage. Something's going to happen to those chondrocytes. They're going to die. Okay? And then we're going to replace that tissue with bone tissue. Okay? So the same type of scenario will happen here. Okay? So when we talk about the endochondral ossification, we're going to start off with our cartilage model here, specifically hyaline. Okay? And this is going to be the majority of the type of ossification process that occurs, all right, in our bodies. So pretty much the lower and upper extremities, okay, your spine, the ends of the clavicle, and your pelvis. Okay, so your appendicular skeleton pretty much undergoes endochondral ossification. And then parts, all right, of your axial skeleton. So we're going to use the example of a long bone here. That's what your book uses, and it's just a little bit easier. Okay? Okay. So the first step is easy. All right? Basically, it's me telling you we're going to start off here with a hyaline cartilage model of the humerus. Okay? And so in this hyaline cartilage model, the osteoblasts are doing what they do. They synthesize and they secrete the cartilage matrix. Okay? And we know when that occurs. 8th to the 12th week of development, it'll occur during that period of time. Okay? So let's check out the picture here. That's what we're going to see here. That's what this little picture here, the baby. Here's the baby sitting here. All right, we're going to take his humerus or her humerus. Here is here's your cartilage model. All right, little baby humerus. All right, with the cartilage matrix. In the cartilage matrix, we have the chondroblasts and chondrocytes surrounded by the perichondrium. Okay? So interstitial and appositional growth is occurring here, okay, to get this to this shape. All right? And this occurs weeks 8 through 12. Okay? Now, doesn't mean that we have to wait until after the 12th week for ossification to occur. It varies from person to person. But at week 9, this ossification can start to happen. Okay? It just varies, and its genetics plays a huge role. All right, so that's step 1. Here's step 2. All right, look at this first word up here. Well, second word, calcifies. Calcifies. All right, so that means we're going to make something hard. Okay? When we get calcium, all right, we're going to turn that matrix into a hard material like bone. Okay? So this is what happens. The chondrocytes, all right, will have these holes that start to occur in the matrix. All right? calcium penetrates into those holes, it gets into the matrix, and it causes the matrix to calcify. And it makes it so hard. Because remember, the matrix, all right, in cartilage, there's a lot of water in there. All right, you got your proteoglycans. You know, it's not hard to get nutrients. But now we've all of a sudden, you think it would be pretty hard if I sealed myself up in concrete? Do you think it would be hard to get me a McDonald's Happy Meal? Yeah, I'm sealed off. You can't get it to me. Okay? So that's essentially what happens here. That poor chondrocyte now has sealed itself off, all right, because that calcium has surrounded that chondrocyte's matrix and calcified it and made it solid. So it can no longer get nutrients through diffusion, and it dies. So that chondrocyte dies. And when that occurs, we start to get these large holes, all right, inside of the bone. Not the bone, but inside our little humerus there. Okay? So we're going to start off, and I should have said this before, all right? When we're talking about the long bone here, all right, let there be light. We're going to start off here in the diaphysis, in the shaft, okay? So as this process occurs, you're going to start to get what we call the periosteal bone collar. So around the diaphysis here, you start to get that calcified matrix, all right, all around the whole thing. All right, and so we get what's called the periosteal bone collar. Now, as we start to grow these holes here, these big holes, guess what? Blood vessels from the outside find a way in. And when that happens, it's game on. Because guess what? Now, we're going to bring in more calcium. So we're going to calcify more of the matrix. And now we're going to start to have osteoblasts come into that region that's been calcified. And guess what it's going to do? What does the osteoblast do? Two things. Synthesize and secrete osteoid. So they're going to come into that area, all right, and they're going to do what they do. They're going to make and secrete osteoid. All right? And so that's going to start to surround this area, and it's going to turn the diaphysis into bone. And then as it converts into bone, that's what we call our periosteal bone collar. Let me show you the picture, because my drawings suck. All right, so here we can see in the beginning here, all right, our chondrocytes here, all right, have now sealed themselves off because calcium has made it into the cartilage matrix and it's turned it hard. The chondrocytes die and they develop all these holes here. And the blood vessel then, or blood vessels, will then penetrate into the diaphysis, all right, and bring all the materials that we need to make bone. Phosphate, calcium, all that's in addition, all right? The osteoblasts in this area will then start to secrete the osteoid, and as there's calcium and phosphate available, it will start to develop, all right, our bone, okay? That bone material starts to replace, all right, the calcium matrix here. So this whole process, I'm skipping on to number 3. My bad. Let me go back here. Let me stay here, okay? So you can start to see, all right, that the compact bone area, or the outer perimeter or region of our long bone, starts to turn into, all right, bone tissue. All right, I jumped the gun there. I apologize. All right. Step 3. Okay. So, since this occurs in the diaphysis, all right, we refer to that region as the primary ossification center. Meaning, that's just the area of the bone that starts to ossify, starts to harden. So, as this occurs, all right, that blood vessel that has actually penetrated into the internal portion there, or the medullary cavity. There's not a medullary cavity yet, but what would be the future medullary cavity, okay? What we start to see is this phenomena, all right, what we call the periosteal bud, essentially that periosteum there is going to extend internally, all right? And that extension internally into the bone is going to be made up of the capillaries and the osteoblasts. Again, the osteoblasts will build the matrix. The capillaries are going to supply the nutrients and the ingredients to make that. So this is just a repeating phenomenon. Okay, osteoblasts keep producing the osteoid. This says osteoids, that should be osteoblasts. All right, the osteoblasts produce the osteoid, right, on top of that calcified templates, you could call it. Okay, it's just like a design in the beginning, and this is where we'll start to see around week 12. Right, we'll start to see the actual bone formation in the center of the bone. And this is going to occur, well, all right, I hate to have you guys look. So it starts here in the center, and then it spreads out. It'll start to work up towards the proximal and distal epiphysis. All right, and so the pattern, what we're going to see, all right, we're going to see the cartilage matrix calcify, degenerate, and then it gets replaced, all right, with bone. That's that repetition there, okay? So going here, all right, just to repeat, we have our cartilage matrix here, right, with the dead chondrocytes inside that degenerate, that leave these large holes. Blood vessel penetrates, all right, osteoblasts and capillaries infiltrate the area here, all right, and they start to lay down the osteoid on top of the old cartilage matrix there. In doing so, it will convert that tissue over into bone tissue. All right, and it spreads outward from the center. So it's going to head up towards the proximal epiphysis and down towards the distal epiphysis. And it occurs first here in the diaphysis, therefore it's referred to as the primary ossification center. Okay, so we start to see that occurring in the diaphysis. So we'll now switch over to the epiphysis. Okay, so now keep in mind that the primary ossification center is going to continue to do the ossification as the secondary ossification centers start to form. So as the primary ossification centers are doing their things, we start to get the formation of our secondary ossification centers. They occur in the epiphyse. Okay, same scenario. All right, the hyaline cartilage tissue calcifies, hardens, the chondrocytes die, they leave these holes in the matrix. All right, osteoblasts and capillaries then infiltrate into those holes, and they start to form osteoid and bone tissue over the remaining cartilage tissue that was there. And then it degenerates all the cartilage tissue, and what's left behind is going to be bone tissue. And that's what's going to occur here. Same type of scenario, all right? Blood vessels infiltrate, all right? And we have our bone-forming cells enter into that area, okay? So at the same time, all right, our osteoclasts are going to start doing bone remodeling at an early period of time, because we are going to start to eventually form that medullary cavity in the center of our bone. Now that doesn't happen until much later in life. Well, when I say much later in life, when we talk about the formation of the medullary cavity, that's going to happen in your childhood years. You don't have a full medullary cavity into your late teens, adult years. Okay, so that's how long it takes. It takes quite a bit of time. Okay, So we are eventually, same process. Start off with the cartilage matrix. We're going to wind up with bone matrix. How do we do that? The cartilage starts to calcify. Those cells die. All right. Then our osteoblasts and osteoprogenitor cells will infiltrate into that area, start laying down osteoid. Blood vessels move into the area, okay? And then we start to build more bone matrix. All the while, osteoclasts will start to remodel because we are going to start to make way for other structures in there. So steps 2 and 3, all right, are going to happen still, all right, when you're inside your mom. After you're born and during your childhood years, that's when we're going to start the formation of your medullary cavity here. Okay? But we have our secondary ossification centers will start to occur all during this time. All right, so the primary ossification center is well underway. Check it out. Looks good. All right, we have our bone tissue here. We're even starting to see the formation of the medullary cavity, all right, but it's not anywhere close to what it should be. All right, our secondary ossifications are starting, and we're getting close to actually developing a full-on growth plate at either metaphysis here. Okay, so that's step 4. 5 and 6 are the shorter ones here. Okay, so pretty much we're going to keep getting rid of that cartilage, except for the hyaline cartilage at the joint spaces, okay, and the hyaline cartilage that's going to be found in the epiphyseal growth plates. All right, so our goal is to get rid of all cartilage. It's like a search and destroy kind of mission, except for the articular cartilage that lines the ends of your bones, and then the epiphyseal cartilage, all right, in the growth plates there. And this occurs, and we'll get into how the bones grow, all right, in the epiphyseal growth plate here. All right. Then eventually, all right, as you move into puberty, okay, and you finish out puberty, you will start to get the closure of the epiphyseal growth plates, because even the cartilage in there will eventually ossify. And then at that point, then we refer to it as the epiphyseal plate or the epiphyseal lines. Okay, and that's going to occur between 10 and 25. So when you see this picture here, I'll come right back. All right, childhood years, we're starting to increase the size of the medullary cavity. All right, pretty much the secondary ossification centers are good to go. All right, so the only cartilage that remains is the articular cartilage, the hyaline cartilage in here, and the hyaline cartilage found in the epiphyseal plate. All right, so that'll stay around until cessation of growth, when you stop growing. All right, when you reach your adult or teen years, eventually the growth plates will close up. All right, and the medullary cavity will be pretty much fully formed. And again, it varies for folks. Like I said, I was still growing when I was in my early to mid-20s. Ooh, I feel like I paid you to ask me these questions tonight. Hormones, and we'll talk about that. Good, I like where your mind's going, all right? And we will discuss how hormones affect bone growth and certain factors, and that's that will have to be next class, yeah, because I gotta take a break. My throat's killing me. And then we got through everything I wanted to talk about. So I'll let you finish up copying that down there. And if you folks at home have any questions, just hold on to them for lab, okay? And we'll talk about it in lab. All right, I am going to stop recording here, so I'll probably lose contact with everybody at home. I apologize.